It's all about winning, not accepting anything less than that. And when you win, everything else comes around. I mean, the winners, the ones that are competitive week in and week out. And those are very rare. And those are the ones that accept no less. You're just either born with it or you're not. First is desire, numero uno. That absolute desire that becomes a passion. You will pursue this no matter what. And then everything else.
Que meraviglia. Okay, hi guys, and welcome to the show. I'll start obviously with a quick wristwatch check. It's getting into that summer season, so what am I wearing? The Squale Azzurro 1521 on the Wrist Candy Watch Club rubber strap there, the waffle, the same one I wear on my Panerai, but this is excellent, high quality FKM rubber strap there. I highly recommend them. Anyway, I've got to say a massive thank you to Shreve, Crump and Lowe in Boston for lending this watch in. They are an authorized dealer for Zenith and many other prestigious brands. And talking of prestige, they happen to be the oldest jewelry and watch store in the United States. So obviously it's an enormous honor for me to be able to review some of their pieces they have in stock. So amazing stuff. As we have already done several deep dives on the horological powerhouse that is Zenith, in today's history section I'm going to focus on the story surrounding two absolutely key watches one must understand when it comes to this 2021 Chronomaster Sport. Firstly, and most obviously, the watch that not only has inspired this watch the most, but essentially put Zenith back on the map after somewhat falling behind the rest of the pack during the golden era of Swiss watchmaking in the 1950s and 60s. We are of course talking about their most iconic watch, the very first to house the El Primero caliber, first launched in January 1969, the A386. It was the brand's bid in the race to release the first automatic chronograph, while who actually was first is still hotly contested to this day. There were two others in the race, Project 99, which was a joint secret collaboration between Heuer, Breitling, Buren and de Buy de Poix with the caliber 11, aka the Chronomatic. And then naturally the Japanese with the Seiko caliber 6139. But regardless of who actually won, Zenith went above and beyond the competition as the El Primero movement had a higher rate of 36,000 vibrations an hour, and was the first automatic chrono to operate at this frequency. This higher rate allowed it greater positional accuracy over the more common frequency of 28,800 vibrations per hour. As a result, the ever-shrewd bosses at Rolex sourced these movements and modified them to power their own racing chronographs from 1988 to the year 2000. And this is the second watch we must mention, for obvious reasons, when talking about today's piece. The more recognizable and ever-lasted after Rolex Daytona. Rolex, in typical Rolex fashion, needed the best of the best to drive their revamped second series of Daytona, previously using modded valve shoes. Zenith by this time had fallen on bad times, again, and having a ton of spares in storage, they needed to sell them off to save the company. Rolex itself has had a bit of a rocky past making chronographs. Their very first effort was during the war, with the now infamous Great Escape chronographs that sold just as badly as their non-automatic pre-Daytonas of the 1960s. It's not a coincidence that a lot of people that worked at Zenith went on to work at Rolex, especially in the higher positions, as the quartz crisis raged on, and Rolex did a much better job at diversifying and pivoting towards more aspirational luxury than Zenith did. And here we are. You can see the results for yourself. So let's start with the materials. We have entirely stainless steel, a very subtly domed sapphire, and then for the, if I just undo it, flat sapphire glass for the back. I don't know why it's not focusing. There we go. And then ceramic for the bezel. We have superluminova, but we'll discuss that a little bit later on. Mostly a mix of very high polished with that contrasting brush. Now I must point out that this is actually a used piece. Shreve Crumpelo, who have lent this in, I happened to notice it in their pre-owned section. They have a really great pre-owned section. I'm always checking it. If I was to buy, I would probably buy this one. I just think it's an amazing deal. So you might notice little scuffs, little marks here and there. The actual diameter is smaller because the bezel tends to overhang, so it wears like a 40. It looks bigger though, because of course the measurements are a little bit misleading. Incredible slenderness there at 13.6, considering it's an automatic chronograph. Very impressive indeed. Lug to lug, we got just a smidgen over 46 millimeters, which is just fantastic, especially for the medium to larger wrist. Oh, and I'll do the lug width, which I believe is 20 as well. A lot lighter than the Daytonas I reviewed before. Again, quite surprising. The fit and feel, just fantastic, amazing quality and really solid feeling. I have a 6.5 inch wrist thereabout, so absolutely perfect for me. And a very kind of masculine look with this A386 of 1969 inspired case. Very much a Zenith trait, these angular lugs and wide beveling, all done exceptionally well. We have a water resistance of 100 meters, which, considering this is a chronograph with 3 points of entry here, not a screw down crown, impressive. Now let's see the magic in action. Oh, there it goes, flying about. So it'll make a rotation every 10 seconds, hence the 10th of a second precision in reading there. It's just mesmeric, isn't it? Wonderful actuation. Let's just reset it. Boom, very responsive. Quite easy to trigger there. We get a 3-link bracelet, solid end links and screwed links, which is very, very nice. The clasp, again, we'll talk a bit about this later. We've got 5 micro adjustments there. Inside we have the proprietary automatic and highly optimized caliber 3600, the latest evolution of half a century of El Primero. Fans of Zenith might recall the prototype version, dubbed the Chronomaster 2, debuting in a limited edition in 2019 as part of the El Primero's 50th year anniversary. Updated once again here, and based on the 400B, this movement encapsulates the brand's expertise when it comes to this type of complication. They have managed to reduce the total number of components from 328 to 311, but still boosting the power reserve an extra 10 hours over its predecessor to a total of 60. The movement's column wheel has also been redesigned to be larger and more visible, along with a lot of extra skeletonization of many other components, from the rotor all the way down to some of the smallest wheels, all to reveal more of the inner workings for you to enjoy and the mechanical magic going on, even when the chrono function is not in use. One of the most niftiest of details is how they have used different shades in the bead blasting, directional brushing, and then thermal bluing to contrast the differing surfaces in order to highlight the various functions of the components. The result is a beguiling cacophony of organized confusion that looks both modernist and avant-garde, and yet somehow ancient at the same time. Often movements are just tarted up to look pretty and sparkle, but this is very intelligently deliberate. There's even an unlubricated silicon escapement now for extra robustness, and thus making the intervals between servicing a lot longer. So no corners have been cut here. And what's nice with this particular caliber, unlike many of the previous El Primeros, we do get hacking this time. Very, very nice indeed. Manual wind, obviously, a nice snappy quick set date there. And what else? Cost levels of accuracy and regulation. A lot of people undoubtedly will simply dismiss this as trying to be a modern Daytona. The design language of the Daytona today was in fact inspired by the Zenith watches of the 1970s. In many ways, it's Zenith reclaiming this look. It was Zenith who first used the combination of a sandwich handset with framed applied markers before they appeared on the second-gen Daytonas. Let's not forget, it's the El Primero movement that also gave the early Daytonas their distinctive sub-dial spacing that differentiates it from the later in-house Rolex Daytonas. However, today, Daytonas have shrouded pushers, and not the more traditional piston head style always used by Zenith. What most of the connotations with Rolex comes down to is, of course, that external fixed ceramic bezel. But Zenith has again cleverly trolled the all too often easily offended watch snobs by turning it into a scale to track the 1/10 of a second with ultra-readable etched graduations. And in doing so, highlights this watch's main party trick, which is absolute genius. I mean, who actually uses a tachymeter these days anyway? The dial features the brand's now signature tricolour, slightly overlapping compact subdials of whitish grey, anthracite and Robocop metallic blue, all taken from the A386 of course, and this is done so subtly but purposely to make them ever so slightly larger and more legible. I love how they've added dashes of Ferrari red to the hands of the 3 o'clock seconds register and the 6 o'clock 60-minute register in order to correspond with the flying 10th of a second main hand. This is so the reader does not confuse it with the 9 o'clock seconds register of the continuous seconds. Again, it's these devilish little details of intelligent design that elevates this watch far beyond the now rather pedestrian Daytona, which, let's face it, has largely stayed the same, minus the material upgrades, since the 1980s. The refinements don't end there. My favourite feature include the multifaceted star logo applied to the dial that makes me instantly think of The Hunt for Red October. I can almost hear Sean Connery's terrible Russian accent as we speak. It's matched by the coolest counterbalance in watch history, second only to those found on Navitimers from the 1990s, like my Cosmonaut. Some erroneously say that this took inspiration from the Zenith Di Luca, which came out in 1988, and I beg to differ. I don't think so at all. I think they get confused simply because the Di Luca was the first automatic Zenith chronograph to have a bezel that wasn't a diver or a pilot's watch. It didn't go well for them, didn't sell well, so what did they do? If you look at the last versions they did, they started adding Mercedes hands, and which was a bit more obvious, right? The Zenith's first kind of slightly misguided attempt at creating something to rival the Daytona. So let's talk about negatives. Well, my first negative is actually the clasp. I think it's rather unimaginative. It's a poorly done imitation of the Rolex clasp. With the crown on the Rolex, there's a natural little bit of overhang which is easier to grip. This is quite, I mean, it's difficult with gloves on, it's difficult without gloves on. It's not the most ergonomic. Also, I would have loved to see some kind of system in there to, you know, to like an easy link or something. I mean, if you're spending around 10 grand, you want every single part of this. Oh well, I expect it to be top notch. Also, the center links. Now, I've owned a high polished oyster bracelet on an old Datejust, well, not an old Datejust, it was a modern Datejust, and they are absolute scratch magnets. Again, this is just my preference. Yeah, I really do feel the clasp is a missed opportunity, and I think it would have done better with some other style of bracelet. Now, the date window on this particular version, it's actually better because they've blacked out the date wheel, which is fine, and on the white they've whited it out, but on the white one you see the edge. I think it's more disruptive to the lines of symmetry. Here, not so much. I would have preferred the no date. You know, that's something I do appreciate about the Daytona. It has a harmonious balance to it. And my next negative, and I hate to bring this up because I do love that beguiling 10th of a second there, really enjoyable, and it certainly is a conversation piece. It's just fun to watch it go. But as somebody who actually uses my chronographs to time things, it's not as practical having the the seconds there as it is at the main larger seconds, because to me, I mean, how useful is 1/10 of a second? When's the last time I cooked some pasta and went, oh, it's got to be to 1/10 of a second? Maybe I'm doing it wrong. I don't know. Maybe I should ask Max Mariola if there's any difference. But no, I use the big seconds, especially with cardio, etc. It kind of negates the point. A wonderful novelty, a wonderful conversation piece, but in actual reality, how useful is it? The next negative, and for me it makes this black dial version the winner if compared to the white dial, is on the white dial, this sub-seconds is almost the same color as the dial in certain lights, so sometimes it looks lopsided, whereas this has a stronger contrast against that black lacquered dial, and I really appreciate that. So if I had to choose between the two, I would definitely go for this one. Talking of legibility, the lume orientation, well, the lume is pretty good, the super lumen over there. If you look at the lume on Speedmaster, you got the little 2 dots and the at the 12 o'clock to instantly tell you which way up it is. On this, the orientation isn't that great. I would have appreciated a fatter marker perhaps at the 12 o'clock, something just to instantly know, yes, that's the 12, that's the right way up. So back in 2019, I reviewed a white dial steel Daytona. Had I have actually bought it, because I did come quite close to pulling the trigger, I didn't have that much disposable income at the time. Had I have done, a few years later when I see this coming out, I would have sold the Daytona and bought this, because this just speaks to me on so many levels. I'm not into value retention and investment potential and all that stuff. I'm a watch enthusiast. I'm not a money enthusiast. I value heritage and mechanics and design and style and just how it makes me feel ahead of value. Everyone's different. We've all got different priorities, right? If I had to choose between this and a Daytona, I'd choose this any day of the week. What about you guys? Would you go Daytona or would you go this? This is not a homage or a rip-off of a Rolex. This is a homage of a Zenith that then inspired Rolex, and in turn Zenith then trolled Rolex with, to create something far better and more interesting. I feel the aesthetics are more about Zenith boldly taking it back and reclaiming their undeniable influence and assistance in helping Rolex making some of the most compelling racing watches. This is the anti-Rolex Daytona, if you will. A Daytona for those who appreciate actual horology and design over status signaling, racing history, and value retention. Now, none of the YouTube channels I personally enjoy and recommend have made any videos about this watch, with the exception of perhaps Watch Maniac and the TOC channel in Italy. A quick shout out to them. So for all I know, I could be just repeating everyone else's thoughts and feelings, and I'm sure the insidious hype machine, that is the YouTube algorithm, would love a vapid 10-minute fake review comparing it to a Daytona. But this just proves how clout chasing most people are. So this watch actually brings a sense of shame to the whole hype surrounding the Daytona. I think I actually got it wrong as well, as it's amazing to me that this Zenith Chronomaster, despite having quite a few negatives we discussed earlier and being far from perfect, it makes the Daytona now feel, well, kind of basic. However, I gotta say, one thing I love about the Daytona, and this goes for the Zenith too, is they both are inherently versatile. Something Rolex is just so good at doing. I mean, that's why I own so many of them. And therefore it works both casually or in more formal situations, on rubber sporty straps or dappered up to the nines on a nice leather strap. Another certainty they both share is the quality and final execution being easily comparable, which again kind of makes the Daytona seem a bit overhyped. And as much as I loathe the expression so favoured by the journalistically compromised watch publications, it truly is a value proposition. This is pure class in a way the Daytona only wishes it could be. But I have to admit, it's unneeded. I'm trying to be a good boy. I'm trying to scale down my collection. I'm going to send it back as soon as I can. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. What do you make of this watch? What do you think Zenith got right, got wrong? Especially, I want to hear that especially. Don't forget to like this video if you want to see more free independent reviews like this. Massive thank you to Shreve, Crump and Low. I will be going to Boston to have a look at their store at some point in the future, so stay tuned for that. Onwards and upwards. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Okay, ciao.